Where were you when Rob Zombie made a precursor to the elevated horror trend? Over the past 10 years or so, the term elevated horror has been thrown around to describe horror movies that explore themes like mental health, addiction, grief, among many other things. Some have argued that horror movies have always explored these themes, which is definitely true, but movies like Hereditary, Midsommar, The Babadook, Get Out have really pushed this into the mainstream. It's kind of become like an elitist way of thinking, like, hey, this movie is good because it's about depression and not filled with a bunch of jump scares. And in some cases, it comes across as a cheap way of making your horror movies seem smart, but that's a different conversation for a different time. I believe all kinds of horror can exist in the ecosystem, and all kinds of horror can range from great to terrible. But what if I told you, of all people, Rob Zombie made a movie that would perfectly fit into this elevated horror mold 2 years before The Babadook and 3 years before The Witch? To put it lightly, Rob Zombie is a very controversial filmmaker. He's very love him or hate him, known for his gross dialogue and over-the-top characters. I've often heard the term hellbilly as a critique of his films. His 2009 film Halloween 2 delved into a very brutal and honest look at trauma. His version of Laurie Strode was dealing with the trauma that Michael Myers put her through and just snowballed into a deteriorating mindset. Like, what would happen if your parents and friends were killed and you were almost a victim yourself? And what if therapy didn't help? And what if the prescriptions didn't help? Rob Zombie has spoken about his unhappiness in working with the Weinstein Company, which actually a lot of people have, but his complaints come from the creative control that he had. Halloween 2 allowed him to express his creative control a lot more than his first Halloween film, but he wanted out of this machine and wanted to make something that gave him ultimate creative freedom. Being free from the Weinsteins, Jason Blum of Blumhouse wanted Rob Zombie to make something very supernatural, probably because this was the era of films like Insidious, Paranormal Activity, and The Conjuring, and Rob Zombie came up with the idea of the Lords of Salem, a psychological horror film about a radio DJ in Salem, Massachusetts, who receives a mysterious record from a band called the Lords. As she plays it, she begins to experience terrifying visions and discovers a dark connection to the town's witch trial past. It does seem a bit odd to ask the guy who made House of a Thousand Corpses, The Devil's Rejects, and Halloween to make a supernatural film, but man, it fucking worked. Rob Zombie's wife Sherry Moon Zombie stars in this as Heidi Hawthorne, because of course she does. She's in all of his movies. But it's almost like this weird character study on her. And definitely Sherry's best performance. Sherry showed brief signs of being able to play a sympathetic character in her role as Michael Myers' mother in Rob Zombie's first Halloween film, but she's only in about half of that movie. While in The Lords of Salem, she can really pull it off and carry the film. She's a recovering addict, and that plays into the movie a lot as she's dealing with the coven of witches. Many people have interpreted this movie as Heidi's visions being her relapsing, which I can definitely see. There's never been a confirmed answer to this, but remember when I said the elevated horror trend started exploring themes of mental health and whatnot? Well, yeah. Here we are. It's a weird blend of witches, covens, drug addiction, radio DJs, all culminating to a doomed and helpless ending, and I'm excited to talk about it. So let's delve into Rob Zombie's The Lords of Salem. Before we begin, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help me get into the algorithm's good graces. Even if you don't have anything to say, comment your favorite Rob Zombie movie below. And if you don't, your family will become a vessel of which the devil will inherit the earth. I don't make the rules, I'm sorry. Thank you. So I'm someone who's loved the way Rob Zombie's Halloween 2 looked, and Rob chose to bring back cinematographer Brandon Trost for this film. Coincidentally, I think that Trost worked with Rob Zombie on 2 of his best-looking films. I actually thought Lords of Salem was shot on 16mm film like Halloween 2 was, but it was actually shot digitally with a 16mm aesthetic added to it. An early idea that Rob Zombie had was to shoot this with bright colors like Dario Argento's Suspiria, but I think the dark and dreary color palette that he chose fits this film better. Lords of Salem does serve as this nice companion piece to Argento's Suspiria, which is weird thinking that Rob Zombie actually made a movie that fits in that category. We open in the year 1696, and Reverend Jonathan Hawthorne writes about a coven of 6 witches and vows to God that he will destroy all persons who pledge allegiance to Satan. Coinciding with that is Margaret Morgan's coven of witches, calling upon Satan. They call Jesus Christ the deceiver of mankind and are willing to give themselves to Satan. What's interesting is that a lot of media on the Salem witch trials tends to talk about how the women were falsely accused, but Rob Zombie chose to have a small part of the women executed actually involved in witchcraft and Satanism. And we know this right from the very start of the movie. These people are guilty. The symbol for this coven is a cross with like half circles on the top and the bottom. It wasn't taken from any particular cult or coven, and Rob Zombie has claimed that it was just made for the movie. There's also a ton of witchy nudity in this movie that I can't show, but it's very purposely gross nudity and not sexy. The Coven even refers to it as them shedding their false bodies, and the naked them is their true selves. 2015's film The Witch featured Black Phillip, an evil black goat that becomes like the face of the movie. But a couple years before that, this film is showing a goat right in its title card. Now, Rob Zombie didn't create the evil black goat symbolism, it's been around forever, but it's very interesting how he used it before The Witch did. The opening of this movie actually reminds me a lot of how The Witch ended, so you can add that to the list of companion pieces to this movie. The title card for this movie is so good, by the way, it's very simple but very effective. Rob Zombie seemed to have taken a lot from Halloween 2 and put it into this movie, like the 16mm look that I mentioned, the dreamy visuals to which are a far cry from the grindhouse-type visuals of his first two films, and even breaking down the movie by days. Halloween 2 tells the story of the days leading up to Halloween and then Halloween Day. Lords of Salem takes us through the week, beginning on Monday. Heidi wakes up on Monday morning. She has a big poster from the 1902 film A Trip to the Moon behind her. This picture also comes back very much later, so I believe this to be a very intentional choice. The moon commonly symbolizes feminine energy, and in this picture the moon is being penetrated by a rocket. In the Lords of Salem, the ultimate goal is for the Lords to have Heidi give birth to the Antichrist against her will. So the moon, representing women, is being violated, for lack of a better word, by this rocket ship representing the Lords. Rob Zombie also said in the commentary that a trip to the moon being so prominent here is to show that anything that happens in this apartment is very surreal, much like the film A Trip to the Moon. Heidi sees someone standing in apartment number 5 and introduces herself, only to be told by Lacey the landlord, played by Judy Geeson, that it hasn't been rented out. Apartment number 5 has been empty for a while, and they can't seem to find a tenant for it. We're introduced to the radio show Heidi hosts, WIQZ Salem Rocks. Her co-hosts are Herman Salvador, played by Jeff Daniel Phillips, who had become a Rob Zombie regular since Halloween 2, and Herman Jackson, played by Joe Grizzly himself, Ken Foree, a legend in the horror community. I've always loved their show, and it's like this funny and annoying radio show with obnoxious drops that I think are fun. I wouldn't listen to 2 hours of this, but it's like a radio show that you'd tune into for like a 20-minute drive. And the fact that these are 3 Rob Zombie regulars really helps with their chemistry, and whenever they're hosting this fake show, it feels like real friends just hanging out. A band named the Lords has sent Heidi a record, in this weird ancient box. It actually looks like a box set you'd see from an artist that would put their vinyl in. I'm pretty sure something similar probably exists like this. For the sake of not getting the Hermans mixed up, I'll refer to Ken Foree as Herman Jackson and Jeff Daniel Phillips as his nickname, Whitey. I don't understand why they called him both Herman, only for the movie to backtrack and call Jeff Daniel Phillips Whitey, but whatever. So Whitey goes home with Heidi, and Jackson goes home to avoid getting another DWS.
Driving while sexy!
Whitey and Heidi are seemingly into each other. Whitey seems to be more into Heidi than she is to him, but they both are a thing nonetheless. They listen to the Velvet Underground, a band formed in 1964. The song here is called Venus and Furs, and later on in the film, their song All Tomorrow's Parties plays, which Zombie has said is the central song for the movie. He claims that every movie of his has at least one song that changes the way you hear it afterwards. Like Halloween 2 had Nights in White Satin, Devil's Rejects had Freebird, things like that. They play the album from the Lords, and it refuses to play for Whitey, but then Heidi can get it to play without any problem, implying that the record was sent for her and was actually specifically for her. The song by the Lords is actually by John Five, guitarist for Rob Zombie, and Griffin Boyce. I'll play a clip of this song just so you can hear how comfortable it is, as long as the copyright gods let me. I couldn't find what exact instruments were used, but John Five said they used techniques like dragging a violin bow across an acoustic guitar. They took inspiration from Jaws and Halloween, where they wanted to create a simple song but one that would stick with you long after the movie ends. The lighting in the room becomes red, but I couldn't find any evidence that the characters changed the lighting, or that something supernatural changed it. I just think it's where the camera is at in the room, and it looks like now there's a red hue in the room, to which is a very effective decision by Rob Zombie. Heidi is clearly affected by this song, and has this very disturbing scene where the witches from earlier are delivering a baby where Margaret Morgan licks the baby, hates it, then spits on it because they failed in rebirthing the Antichrist. Excuse me? So Heidi, having heard the song, is now kind of under the spell of these witches, and will learn that this song will become like a weapon to resurrect the Coven. I don't think that it's a coincidence that we cut to the next day, and Heidi is immediately going to her group therapy for people struggling with addiction. Like, once she's under the influence of the Lords, the movie reveals that she's a recovering addict. So perhaps the allegory for the whole film being about drug addiction holds a lot of weight. Rob Zombie has said that he likes movies where you can interpret different things, so I think this is him kind of showing that he could do that too. On the radio show, they're interviewing Francis Matthias, who wrote the book titled Satan's Last Stand: The Truth About the Salem Witch Trials. He says that witchcraft is a psychotic belief brought upon by a delusional state of mind. Right after we get introduced to our skeptic, Heidi plays the Lord's song in their segment Smash or Trash, where lesser-known bands send in their music for them to play. And in one of my favorite sequences in this film, we see a bunch of women around Salem listening to the radio show, just at their jobs or at home, and they fall under the spell of this song. It's just really cool to see how Rob Zombie, who is known for these loud hellbilly-type movies, kind of subtly shows a coven of witches quietly influencing the minds of women through their music. Francis's wife has recorded the broadcast and says the name Lords of Salem sounds familiar. Francis serves as like the skeptic who asks questions and uncovers things. As Heidi walks through the town back to her apartment, the camera stops on a statue of Elizabeth Montgomery, which is actually in Salem, Massachusetts, where the film takes place, and a few days were actually filmed here. Elizabeth Montgomery played the witch Samantha in the TV show Bewitched, which was a fun portrayal of witches, so it's wild to see the contrast from a sitcom and the commercialization of witches, while there's this dark nihilistic witch story unfolding here. Lacey the landlord wants to introduce Heidi to her two sisters, Sunny and Megan, played by Dee Wallace and Patricia Quinn. They're very cryptic right off the bat, saying things like "join us," and "we'll be waiting." Sunny is a self-help guru, and Megan is a palm reader that can apparently see things deeply into the world beyond. While respectable career choices, in the context of this movie, they raise eyebrows and make us suspicious. Megan reads Heidi's palm and claims that the hand and the brain are one. The right hand is the future, and she says the line of fate on her hand is concerning. Heidi is told to make peace with her subconscious desires, which are the wicked thoughts in her head. And the darkness in her soul is the only reason that she exists. So we can kind of gather that Heidi doesn't have much time left, and her fate is to surrender to the darkness. There's a mention about the differences between fate and destiny that I want to talk about at the end of the movie, so we'll keep this in mind. I like the bickering amongst the sisters, like when Lacey tells Megan that it's annoying when she gets so intense during her readings. There's also a very good shot of Heidi walking into her apartment, and the light by the dreaded apartment number 5 is kind of like moving. Heidi's dog Troy, which was originally named Steve in the script, but they decided to keep the dog's actual name Troy, begins scratching at apartment number 5. Which I'm under the belief that dogs can sense bad energy, so this is just a telltale sign for me to move out of this apartment. The door for apartment number 5 opens on its own, and Heidi walks down the hallway very slowly. Rob Zombie has told the story of the camera crew moving too fast, or Sherry Moon would think that walking too slow looks stupid, so he would play the score for the scene while they were filming the scene so that everyone would understand to move to the music. It's just kind of a cool example of composers working alongside the film crew to make the scenes work. Inside the apartment is a red glowing cross, and that's it, until she raises her arms, as if she's accepting the cross, and there is a beast behind her, one we don't really see other than its silhouette. We can assume this to possibly be the Antichrist, whom we see when Heidi has these visions of the coven around the fire. When Heidi leaves the apartment, she's marked with a symbol of the coven, and Margaret Morgan herself, the leader of the coven, appears in the hallway telling Heidi, "Bleed us a king." So we're in like Rosemary's Baby, Immaculate, or the First Omen territory where Heidi is to give birth to the Antichrist. We also see what became of the coven of witches as we see 6 graves and a sign saying, "Here be witches." Heidi wakes up and we jump to Wednesday. I just watched Halloween 2 before writing this video. I just want to add Halloween 2 to the list of companion pieces to this movie because they have very similar nightmare visuals, and it just further proves my point that Halloween 2 was like a test run for what Rob Zombie could do with Lords of Salem. Heidi stumbles upon a chapel and finds a priest who seems to be a helping hand. He points out that Heidi is a sad girl, and Heidi falls asleep and has this dream of the priest telling her about a war raging in heaven, and God doesn't spare angels when they sin. He forces her to go down on him before he throws up black goo. I kind of took this scene as even when Heidi finds peace, like the safety of a chapel and a priest, the lords will do something to interrupt it so that she can carry out their mission. When she leaves, there's this faceless man walking a goat towards her, whispering, "We've been waiting for you, Heidi." While it's a nice visual, this guy never really comes back into the movie, so it's kind of like a nothing jump scare. The mask he's wearing comes back multiple times, but its importance is never explained. Jeff Daniel Phillips actually plays this guy because I guess the original actor just never showed up, so I guess the original plans for whoever this was were scrapped. Francis Matthias, our skeptic, and now witch hunter, reads the book The End of the American Witch, which gives us flashbacks to the murder of the Coven of Witches. And this movie holds nothing back in showing how brutal these murders were. They're tied up, Margaret Morgan is forced to wear a metal mask called the Shame Mask, and they're burnt to death. There's a novelization for this movie written by Rob Zombie and B.K. Evanson that expands a lot on this story. For example, these masks in the novel actually have holes where they put spikes into the temples of the witches. In the movie, this just isn't here. The book also mentions that Satan has a goat, so maybe the guy walking the goat in the cemetery is Satan himself, which kind of goes against what we see in the apartment and what we see later on, but who knows. I'll talk more about the novelization at the end of the video, but there's an entire subplot that was removed, so if you love this movie, I really suggest checking out the novel. This book that Francis is reading also has the final pages of Jonathan Hawthorne's diary, the man who killed these witches, which we begin to hear in the film's opening. He referred to the witches as the Lords of Salem, the name of the band that Heidi received the record from. The pages also feature music notes that are exactly the same as the song. I don't know anything about music, but it's crazy how the song that Jonathan's wife plays on the piano is the same as the Lord's song, but I'm going to assume Rob Zombie knows a lot more about music than I do, so I'll let it go. I want to touch upon this very lightly, but like I talked about earlier, a lot of Heidi's behavior could be a metaphor for a struggling addict. She's slowly becoming insane, showing up late to work. Those around her can tell that something's wrong, and the visions of witches could symbolize the urges. Herman broadcasts on the radio that the Lords are coming to Salem for a show and the tickets are free, and he once again plays their song on air. Heidi gets sick from this, and you can tell the guys really think that she's relapsing. And man, Sherry Moon's acting chops are on full display here. I love how in this and Halloween she's like a very sympathetic character, instead of like the loud hellbilly that she plays in most of Rob Zombie's other movies. I tried to find any remnants of what this toy Heidi is playing with could be, but I couldn't find anything. I think it just kind of looks like the guy with the goat in the cemetery, but I'm not sure. Or it's possibly wearing the shame mask that the witches wore. Who knows? I don't know if I'm like looking for something that isn't here, or who knows. So apartment number 5 is now spewing rats, like Willard lives there or something, as we cut to Thursday. Francis goes to speak with A.J. Kennedy, writer of the book The End of the American Witch. So as we know, Jonathan Hawthorne and his people killed Margaret Morgan and her coven of witches. But what Kennedy didn't write about was the curse of Margaret Morgan. Jonathan Hawthorne's bloodline will be a vessel for which the devil will inherit the earth. I don't know about you, but if I'm writing a book about the execution of these witches, I would probably mention this part in the story. Whitey and Heidi are talking, and Whitey confesses his worry about her relapsing, and Heidi confesses that the Lord's music is messing with her. I don't entirely know what it is, but I feel like this relationship between these two doesn't get explored enough. I honestly think it's because Rob Zombie casted his wife in this role that he doesn't want to see her have a romantic role with another guy, maybe. The best I can describe it is that they're very distant from each other, which could be intentional because I think it's a very one-sided relationship where Whitey likes her a lot more than she likes him, but I don't know. The relationship type chemistry is off compared to the friend group chemistry they had early on in the radio show. In the commentary for this film, Rob Zombie said that a lot of the dialogue was cut between these two actors in favor of things like montages of them walking down the street, which I really think was a bad idea. I would have rather had this relationship kind of explored more. Like I said, I'm not sure if he's just uncomfortable filming his wife in like intimate scenes to establish a relationship or what it is. I think the relationship really needed something like that. I'm not talking like full on intimate, but I'm talking about like conversations, like dialogue would really work. So Heidi begins to cough up blood, and she talks about the record, and when Whitey calls an ambulance, she sees 3 more of these faceless people like the guy in the cemetery, except this time they're wearing nurses' attire. Kind of like how when she went to the church and started having these visions, it seems like whenever Heidi tries to reach out for any kind of help, the Lords have a way of stopping her. The movie Captain Kidd is playing on the TV during this scene. As these guys are looking at Heidi, we hear from the movie, "Let's be sensible about this. Who knows? We might be useful for each other." Kind of as if these people are telling Heidi that the coven needs her, and vice versa. So Heidi has a wild dream of these doctors cutting her open and removing a worm-like creature from her stomach. She wakes up, but even when she's awake, she's haunted, because in the bathroom, the artwork on the wall, which is a bunch of guys wearing masks that look very similar to the doctors, start to bleed from the mouths and eyes, and repeating Heidi's name. I think one of the flaws I could pick out from this movie is that a lot of the symbolism like this really doesn't mean anything, at least to me. It might have been something to Rob Zombie, but it didn't really translate as well as it could have. While the visuals are amazing, I wish there was a bit more symbolism to what they actually mean. Heidi's movements, especially as Thursday ends, really begin to look like someone who is relapsing or suffering from withdrawals, and this is confirmed as she actually does relapse due to these hallucinations. I understand the character arc here, but I really wish Heidi wouldn't have relapsed. I like the idea of people thinking she's relapsing, but it's actually just the Lords messing with her. But it does definitely show how messed up she is from the situation because it drives her to relapse. I guess either way works. I think I would have preferred if she didn't relapse, but that's just kind of a personal choice of mine. Where Heidi goes to buy the drugs, there's paintings of white faces on the door, which Heidi actually has on her face later on in the movie when she comes face to face with Satan. The sisters show up to Heidi's apartment on Friday morning, looking very similar to the witches from Hocus Pocus. And if you didn't already think they were suspicious, they say they notice Heidi wasn't looking good, and they bring her tea. Things kind of start to culminate as Frances finds Heidi's family tree, very easily by the way. I don't know if this is possible, but if it is, it's very creepy. Heidi LaRocque is actually a stage name for the radio show, and her real name is Adelaide Elizabeth Hawthorne, a descendant of Jonathan Hawthorne. Remember a few minutes ago when I mentioned his bloodline will be a vessel in which the devil will inherit the earth? So Frances conveniently is a little bit too late because the sisters have Heidi unconscious from the tea and tell Frances that he has the wrong number when he tries to call her. These women put on some crazy good performances as well. They're pushing Heidi down the hallway and praying to Satan. I can't imagine living in apartment 3 and you just hear 3 women outside screaming for Satan in the hallway.
I'm sure there's 2 sides to this.
They draw the Lord symbol on the floor in front of apartment number 5, and instead of it just being a dark apartment, it turns into this massive cathedral. So I guess this apartment is like a portal of sorts. Rob Zombie described this movie as if Ken Russell directed The Shining, which I definitely see it in this scene. The steps look very much like the steps in the Overlook Hotel, but this is a church, and apparently where Satan resides. This scene is pretty much what a lot of people think of when they think of this movie. Heidi has the white face paint now, with the coven symbol on her head, which isn't really explained, but nonetheless, some tremendous visuals. And this little creature thing is supposed to be Satan himself. A very unique interpretation of Satan, to say the least. Rob Zombie has described it as a cross between a deformed baby and an overcooked turkey. So do with that what you will. And this scene is definitely doing it for someone, as it gives Heidi these long tentacles that she holds, and they look a lot like penises, as a symbolism for her being impregnated with the Antichrist for the coven. The next day, Whitey tries to get Heidi to meet him before the Lord's show in hopes of getting help for her. She turns this down, and there's a very weird shot focused on this painting of a girl in cat ears holding strings attached to white mice. I tried to find what this painting is, or to find any connection to the movie, but I came up empty. If you know what this possibly means, please let me know. I'm very confused by this. This is a rare occasion where there is actually a connection between Heidi and Whitey, but it takes place over the phone. He tells her that he might have not been there for her in the past, but he will be now, and she says that she knows and always will know. So there was something between them in the past, and something is still there, but like I mentioned earlier, it's very unexplored. Frances shows up to meet with Heidi, only to meet Lacey, who claims that she takes care of Heidi. We've established that these women and their teas aren't to be trusted, but they bring Frances in and offer him some tea. Sonny seems to be hitting on Frances, and Megan gets cryptic once again by talking about children and how most of them are a waste, but sometimes a special child will come along, either foreshadowing Heidi or her unborn Antichrist baby. It's a bit frustrating how clueless Frances is when he's talking to these women, because you would assume that since he's investigating the coven of witches, he'd be more aware that some witches are right in front of his face, but he kind of just ignores all the red flags. I don't knock the movie for this, I just think he's written to be kind of dumb. They question why someone as old as him would be listening to the music that Heidi would play on the radio. And they say that he seems like someone who would mind his own business. While he thinks this is funny, Lacey tells him that there's nothing funny about this, and you can feel the entire tone of this scene change as she confesses that she knows that he's trying to get inside of Heidi's head and fuck her brain, which I've never heard it phrased like that, but this is Rob Zombie's writing after all, so we had to get something in there. And Sonny just straight up beats Frances to death with a pan, like it's Norman Bates beating his mom in Psycho 2. Rob Zombie always has been good with shooting these realistic murders, and this is no exception. I also really like how they mock the book that Frances had by calling it a fairy story, and I love how it seems like Frances would be the one to save Heidi, like he's the one who's been investigating this and whatnot, but then he's just quickly killed off. The ladies even say what a waste of a good man, and that he was never going to be able to stop anything, which I think is such a cold line. The apartment building is now roaring as the lights move, which is again like if Ken Russell made The Shining. The visuals of the hallway in this apartment are loud, while Kubrick's Overlook Hotel is quiet. So Whitey shows up to see Heidi, maybe he can help. Heidi's apartment is now fully lit in red, and there's a stone nun watching over her. Rob Zombie also wants everyone to check out his wife's ass too, which is nice. While it seemed like Whitey was distant from Heidi's problems prior to this movie, it's a nice contrast here, as Heidi is distant from him, and even listens to Lacey when she tells Heidi to have him wait outside. So later on outside the Lord's show, Herman seems very concerned about Heidi, and Whitey tells him not to worry about it. Originally there was going to be like this father-daughter type bond between Heidi and Herman that was once again cut from the movie. In a final, I guess, gesture for them, Heidi doesn't let Herman and Whitey into the building where the Lords are playing as a way of saving them, I guess. I have not finished reading the novelization, but I believe Whitey and Herman's fates are explained more in the book. This just seems like they ran out of money to film a lot of the important scenes to make us care about these characters, so we don't really know their fates after this. Rob Zombie removes all restraint that he showed in the first 90 minutes of this movie in these final 10, and I think this could be because they ran out of money. Like maybe it was easier for Rob to throw a bunch of money into this music video type shots and call it a witchy ceremony. The three sisters come on stage and tell their lord that they're ready to bring his child to the world. The ghosts of Margaret Morgan and her coven join them on stage and calls on Heidi, telling her they've always been waiting for her. The Lord's theme begins to play, causing all 17 concertgoers to strip. So, I mean, we got naked old people now. You might as well just smack an A24 logo on this movie right now, and it'll be certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm having a hard time deciding whether this ending is like the highlight of the movie for me or the downfall of the movie, because it feels like we're leading to something like this, but it's also so different from everything that has happened before. The coven of naked witches walk down a hallway with the weird faceless priest guy. A voiceover tells us that death will come to each and every one of us. If we are saved by Jesus, our bodies will rise again. If we lose our battle with temptation and choose to ride upon the goat, we know what our agony will be. And yeah, Heidi is indeed riding on a goat. These visuals are like identical to a Rob Zombie music video. And we cut to the birthing. Heidi gives birth to a weird tentacle bug thing. Wayne Toth did a great job on the practical effects for this movie. I don't think I mentioned it before, but yeah, just all the effects in this movie are practical, and Wayne Toth did a fantastic job. Heidi now stands on top of a pile of dead bodies from the Lord's show, having white eyes and being worshipped by the three sisters. All Tomorrow's Parties by the Velvet Underground play over the ending of the movie. Heidi's fate was fulfilled. But remember how I mentioned earlier that there was a mention of the difference between fate and destiny? Fate is predetermined, and destiny can be changed. The final shot of this film is Heidi playing with her dog Troy, which could be a shot of happier times, but I like to think that if Heidi had it her way, this would be her destiny, but fate had other plans. Especially because there's an abrupt hard cut to the credits, where a news report talks about 32 female bodies being found in a mass suicide. The women were descendants of the original Salem village, which is why the Lord's music summoned them here at the end of the film. And Heidi is missing, with no leads on where she could be. It's a very open and very apocalyptic ending. Like, a lot of things could happen since the Antichrist is literally birthed. I've seen theories of the Antichrist actually killing the three sisters too, because he's the Antichrist, doesn't care about their witchcraft stuff they got going on. But I think that Heidi and the sisters are elsewhere, reigning as the Antichrist takes over the world. A dark ending that brings upon the end of the final days of humanity. A month before the April 2013 release of the movie, the novelization was released for the Lords of Salem. I touched upon it a bit throughout the video, but it's a much more fleshed out version of the story. It was based off of the original script for the movie before the budget restraints affected a lot of the film. I haven't finished it yet, so I can't speak for the entirety of it, but I really wish a lot of the novel would have been adapted to the film. There's an entire prologue of the Coven of Witches being executed, and a film within a film subplot featuring actors Udo Kier, Camille Keaton, and Clint Howard, which was cut from the movie. It's called Frankenstein and the Witch Hunter and serves as a tribute to Hammer horror films. Kind of like what I talked about in my video on The Empty Man, The Lords of Salem feels like the right movie at the wrong time. It pretty much made back its $1.5 million budget, but that's about it. Reviews are very mixed across the board. And I always take Rob Zombie's criticism with a grain of salt because there are people who love every Rob Zombie movie just because it's made by him and people who hate them for the same reason. And the reception mirrored that, with audiences split on the Lords of Salem. While the budget restraints rear their ugly head, and the movie has a lot of visuals that either don't mean anything or the visuals are unclear of what they mean, I think Lords of Salem fits well among the elevated horror atmosphere we've been going through recently. It'd make a crazy good triple feature with other witch movies like The Witch and the remake of Suspiria. There are also like a dozen horror films per year released that use monsters or demons as a metaphor for trauma or addiction, and Lords of Salem was doing this years before. It's crazy. Unfortunately, Rob Zombie went back to the hellbilly type movies after this, with 31 and 3 from Hell, which I didn't really care for either one of those. I think his latest film, The Munsters, is very fun, but I love this trippy filmmaking style that he tried with Halloween 2 and doubled down with in Lords of Salem. I doubt it would ever happen again, but I'm dying for Rob Zombie to return to this style just one more time. Anyway, that's all I have on the Lords of Salem. If you like this video, then leave me a like and comment to help out the algorithm. Like I said, even if you don't have anything to say, tell me your favorite Rob Zombie movie. And I gotta go, before I get another DWS, if you know what I mean.